Dr. Scott Kaufman, history chair, Francis Marion University, is here. Okay, I want to get your opinion on this because I know that you can't be supportive of this. Let me find the article that I read in CNN this morning, CNN's political edition.
Well, if it's CNN, I support it.
Okay, I'm sure you do. So the investigative agency that has become the U.S. Congress is now subpoenaing, is that the right way to say it? Subpoenaing the Trump financial records from Deutsche Bank and Capital One. That's who Trump does the majority of his banking and development work with. And Trump is suing Deutsche Bank and Capital One, saying you don't have the authority to release my financial information on here we go with the word, in a legislative witch hunt. Do you think, because I find you to be fair-minded. I know you don't care much for Trump, and I respect that, but I find you to be fair-minded. Do you believe that Congress should have the authority to disclose or have at their avail a person's financial records and statements when they've not been charged with a crime?
We could look at the same kind of thing with regard to Watergate, where Congress demanded tapes from the White House once it became clear that there was a taping system. And the president said, these are mine under executive privilege. And the Irvin Committee said, we want those tapes. And it ended up going to the courts. I think you see a similar situation here. Congress is trying to find out if there was any kind of relationship between the Trump campaign or members of the Trump family and the Russians. And they want to see if, in fact, there was something there. So there is precedent for something like this. Now, it's going to ultimately be up to the courts to decide how far Congress's reach goes in this case.
Okay, my good doctor friend, you would agree that the Nixon tapes were public record. They were property of the federal government.
That was determined afterward. I mean, he said those were my property.
But it was not private citizen. It was executive authority. I mean, he was arguing that the office of presidency is protected from some of the recourse that other agencies would have against a government agency, not the executive branch.
But it was up to the courts to make that decision.
But surely you're not arguing that Trump's personal financial records are similar to recordings that were made in the Oval Office while Richard Nixon was an American president.
But if you look at any kind of an investigation that is taking place...
But what are we investigating? I thought we already had an investigation, Scott. That's what I don't understand. Or are we just not accepting the results of the Mueller report, who we told was the most honorable man in the history of mankind? Are we not... I mean, other than Jesus... This guy was impeccable. This guy was the truth teller. This guy was the one that we could trust to put biases and prejudices and political preferences aside and tell us what happened. And he came back and said, I find this man not guilty of any crime. And now the House... No,
careful there.
I'm not going to be careful because you're innocent until proven guilty. And if Mueller believed Trump obstructed justice, he would have charged him with obstructing justice. He left that open-ended, in my opinion, as a playbook for the Democrats in Congress.
My response to that is what he decided is when he said Democrats in Congress, I think he meant Congress in general. It'd be up to Congress to decide if, in fact, there was obstruction of justice. And from the Democrats' point of view, they want to look more into these records. And it's not just Democrats. I mean, there are some Republicans. Mitt Romney has had some questions.
Well, he's always been real fond of Trump.
Well, but to find out if there's some additional information. Don't forget also that a lot of the Mueller report was redacted. So this could be also an effort to find out what was redacted, what information is out that may have been redacted that they're unable to get access to. So this is something that the Democrats, or the Democrat-led House at the very least, Jerry Nadler among others, is looking into to find out if, in fact, there were other avenues of relations between the Trump campaign, the Trump family, and the Russians. And so they have a right to subpoena this, but whether, in fact, they have the right to look at that information, that's going to be up to the courts to decide.
Okay, let's ask this. And this is an interesting, perplexing dynamic, I guess, of this debate. As far as I'm concerned, the launching of the investigation was to find out and consider whether or not Russian agents influenced the outcome of the election. You would agree that was the predeterminate. That was what we were seeking to find an answer to.
If you look at the mandate, it said yes, but also the investigation was allowed to go in any directions that the evidence led to.
Well, I mean, special counsels tend to turn into that. I mean, you would agree to that. I mean, they tend to turn into something that they were not originally intended to be.
It was a broad mandate.
I mean, Bill Clinton can live with Ken Starr's report.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they didn't go looking for girlfriends in Monica Lewinsky and affairs. They went looking for shady transactions in the land deal that Hillary Clinton was involved in. Okay, stick with me. So if there was no, we'll argue. I think we'll agree that the Russians did try to influence the election.
Absolutely.
They always do. They always will. I mean, they don't like us. We don't like them. That there's kind of a role we play at the world stage at times that we appear to be, I think about fanatical Islam. I mean, there's a belief that Russia and America kind of sort of walk in the same step as it relates to defeating and combating fanatical Islam and Islamic terrorism. I know you don't like that choice of words, but that's my word, not yours. Okay, stick with me. So if we've established that the Russians did indeed try and influence the outcome of the election, but Trump was not complicit, Trump had nothing to do with it. There is no corroborating, substantiating evidence that shows Trump or any Trump associates had anything to do with what Russia was trying to do. How did he obstruct justice? How was it possible to obstruct justice if there was no crime of collusion? What justice is he trying to obstruct? If justice prevails and justice suggests that Trump did not collude, what is Trump trying to obstruct?
Okay, that's the Barr response. If, however, you look at legal precedents elsewhere, such as the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which has determined that even though you may not be complicit in the original crime or the original action that occurred, that if you, in fact, do partake in an effort, now there has to be proven intent here, but if you intentionally try to prevent an investigation that is taking place, that is, in fact, obstruction. So, for instance, let's take the example of Trump. If Trump fired Comey because he was trying to, in some way or other, intentionally affect the investigation into the Russia relationship between the Trump campaign and Russia, that would lead us down the road toward obstruction. If, however, he fired Comey just because he didn't like the guy, then there would probably not be obstruction. You have to prove intent. That is the issue, however. If you can find evidence that strongly points to, if not proves intent to interfere with an investigation, then that leads you down the road toward obstruction of justice, even if the person who's being accused or charged with obstruction didn't partake in the initial actions.
You would agree that Donald Trump was well within his executive authority to fire Jim Comey?
He was, depending on he could fire. Yeah, he could fire Jim Comey. The question is what the rationale was.
The Constitution says he has that authority.
Yeah.
He has broad discretion in those sorts of matters and actions. He fired Comey. Okay, you would agree that other than a mind reader, nobody will ever know the intent that Donald Trump had.
Unless there is some kind of smoking gun.
But what I'm arguing, Scott, is we've had a 2.5-year investigation. What are we going to do? Say Mueller didn't turn over this rock or Mueller didn't properly interpret this? If we agree that Comey was fired for whatever reason, doesn't matter, then we've got to agree that the only way to know for sure what Trump's motivations were is if we have a mind reader. If we find somebody that can read the mind of Orange Man Bad and interpret whatever his brainwaves say. I mean, what I'm saying is it's an outlandish position to have if we agree that Trump legally had the right to fire Comey, and he did. I think even the most staunch Trump hater believes he had the executive authority to do that. There is no way to interpret intent. That there will never be a way to interpret intent. It will be the great unknown from now to the end of time. The people who hate Trump will always say, well, that's why he did it. The people who like Trump will say, well, he did it because Comey sucked, or he didn't want a 6'8", head of the FBI. What I'm arguing is when we start down the road of believing we can understand what people's intent are, we'll make everybody a criminal. We'll turn everybody in this country into a criminal.
If we jump back to precedent, let's go back to Watergate again. Prior to Alexander Butterfield coming before Congress and telling the Irvin Committee that, in fact, there was a taping system in the White House that then allowed members of Congress to find the smoking gun tape as it became known that showed Trump that Nixon obstructed justice. We were in a similar situation. The question is there some evidence out there, something that may have been redacted, or something that still potentially may not have been uncovered? And we don't know.
But Mueller knows the redacted report, and Mueller concluded that there was no obstruction of justice.
He did not conclude there was no obstruction of justice.
If he didn't conclude there was, then he concluded there wasn't. If his job was to investigate whether a crime was committed, and he concluded that there was, you can't have it both ways.
He did not make that conclusion. He left that up to Congress to make that decision whether, in fact, there was obstruction of justice.
So why did he not make that conclusion?
Because he himself believed that, based on the evidence he had, he couldn't prove it one way or the other. That would be up to Congress to make the decision.
You know why I believe Mueller didn't make the decision? Because Mueller knows he's not a mind reader. And Mueller knows that there's no way we'll ever know why Donald Trump fired Jim Comey, but he had a right to fire him. I mean, I could never invite you on this radio show. I mean, you could never invite me to go to Francis Marion. I mean, their intent is so indiscernible. I mean, you really can't get your arms around what somebody's intent. And what I'm arguing is, if Mueller believed that he had a smidgen of information or evidence to suggest that he could conclude what Trump's intents were, he would have nailed him to the wall. He would have nailed his orange man-bad butt to the wall and never let him take another breath. And you know that as good as I do, because Mueller hates Donald Trump.
Well, first of all, this guy is... Then apparently the Republicans hate Donald Trump because Mueller is a Republican.
Well, I mean,
himself.
90% of Washington hates Trump. You know that.
But if we also consider that Mueller wasn't the only investigation, there are other investigations going on right now. Trump is an unindicted co-conspirator in the Southern District of New York right now. They're uncovering their own evidence. So Mueller may have had that in mind as well. That may be one of the questions members of Congress will want to ask him. But clearly, based on what he had found, he said this is up to Congress, but there are other investigations going on that he's turned over to, again, like the Southern District of New York, and they're going down their own paths and they're uncovering their own information. We don't know what Michael Cohen has. He claims he has 14 million additional documents. I have no idea if that's true or not, but if there's some additional evidence out there, something that points to, hey, there's another path down here that we need to follow, that's the kind of thing I think Mueller would be.
Last question. I want to go to one thing before let's get out of here. Last question. So you think that Deutsche Bank and Capital Bank or Capital One should turn over Trump's financial information to Congress?
I think that's up to the courts to decide.
Fair enough. Last question. There's been you're Jewish. There's been a rash of anti-Semitism.
Yes, there has.
In a very violent fashion, very violent way. I know the history. I understand some of the aspects. I'm not Jewish, so I try not to argue on behalf of a group of people who I'm not a part of. Your take on the most recent examples of not hostility, but downright violence. I mean, just anger, rage, hatred toward a group of people.
I think it's part of a broader hatred we're seeing. I mean, hate crimes have been up for the past, 5 years or so. There was a study done in the 30 largest cities, which are seeing a consistent increase in that taking place. And part of the problem is that there's not a strong enough effort, particularly in the U.S., at the top echelons of government. It's not the only reason, but a big reason, that we are not taking enough steps to delegitimize these folks, to shame them, to make it clear that white nationalism, anti-Semitism, hate groups are not part of what America is about. The problem is that we are seeing these groups getting legitimized in some aspects. We're also seeing them using social media very effectively. And it is leading to individuals engaging in these crimes against individuals just because of what their race or religion or ethnicity happens to be. And it's infuriating.
Last question. Does Trump bear any responsibility in the recent uptick in these sorts of occurrences?
You're not going to like my answer to this. Washington Post did a survey and found that in those counties where there was a Trump rally, hate crimes increased 226% over the following year. And I think what has to happen is this president needs to do a much better job of coming out. I mean, he is the leader of this country. He needs to do a much better job of coming out and saying, this kind of stuff will not be accepted. Don't say, for instance, like he did with Charlottesville, there are good people on both sides. I am sorry. If you're talking about hatred toward another group just because of their religion or their color or their ethnicity, you are not what America is about as far as I'm concerned.